in the light of his glory, it starts to become a little bit, I think there's more going on here than I really thought about. Now, I do believe 100%, and I'll say it several times this morning, in the salvation of mankind in Jesus Christ, that man needed to be saved. I will never take a back seat on that, so please hear me clearly. I'm just saying that man needs more than that. And God wants to reveal more than that. There's a lot more. Much, 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 much more. And when we reduce it to like a doctrine, I think right there is the trick. Right there is the trick of the naughty angel right there. He's got us so focused on one thing. You know, that's what magicians do, don't they? They get you focused on one thing, and they're doing something else, aren't they? And nobody knows what they're doing, because they're not looking at that. They're looking at the thing the magician wants them to look at and be consumed by and go, wow, how did he do that? And the magician is laughing all the way to the bank. We said that John 1:14 and the second chapter, when John is talking about the glory of God and then talks about turning the water into wine, was his first manifestation of his glory. Not all of it, just a manifestation. And John would go on to write about many, many more manifestations of his glory. All the different things he did. They were all pointing to his glory. And just in case we missed it, he prays in John 17 about the glory. I've given them my glory, but there's much, much more involved in my glory. Romans 3:23, you know, if you've ever learned the Roman road and that whole thing, you know, all have sinned. All have sinned, so we're in this club. It's something we all share in common, humanity, every single person. While we're busy dividing genders and races and social... Well, I got news for you. We're all in one club. We're human beings that have all sinned. Every single person. It also says, and fallen short of the glory of God. And we always put those two things together. Well, you see, sin is falling short of the glory of God. Well, I wouldn't argue with that, but I don't believe that's what Paul's actually saying. He's saying all have sinned. All, I'll put that aside, get the infection of sin out of your brain, and hear the second part of it. All have fallen short of the glory. Now, we've heard that so many times, and we've heard the lesson. Well, actually what that means is like shooting an arrow at a target, and you fall short of the target. You know, all have sinned and fallen short. And that's not what Paul is really saying. He's saying what he's saying. Exactly. Everybody has sinned. You all belong to humanity, which is a good club to be in, by the way. It's a really, really good club because God's absolutely nuts about humanity. He so loved the world that he sent his son to save it. So that's a good club to be in, humanity. The other side of it, but at the same time, Paul's trying to say, but all fall short of the glory of God. And that word fall short in the Greek, not what we wanted to say, but what it actually... Remember when the rich young ruler comes to Jesus and he's got tons of stuff and Jesus says to him, one thing you lack? That's the same word, lack. There's something humanity lacks. In John 2:3, we've talked a lot about the water to wine. In fact, would somebody read verse 3 of John 2? Because it's the same word in there again.
And when the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him...
That's good. The wine gave out. They lack. One thing you lack. You've fallen short of the glory. This is a huge subject. Falling short of the glory. That could never be attained. Because of sin? Because the incarnation hadn't happened yet? Question, is the manifestation and fullness of God's love, his nature, only a response to failure, the need to be saved and restored? Or is that the point? So you're confusing me now. In other words, if the incarnation and if salvation are all about our failure, that we need to be saved and restored, that's one thing. Or is that the point? When John writes, behold, what manner of love is this, that accepts the unacceptable. I'm not presenting a doctrine. I want to say it quite simply. The revelation of God's love is more in the context of when we screw up and get a revelation of how much he loves us than it is when we get it all right and he loves us. Every kid, they really believe that mommy and daddy love them because they do this and they do that and they do this and they do that. And when they do something wrong, oh, mommy and daddy don't love me. I would venture to say that it's unusual to find someone, a child, who understands the nature of love to the point that love is always, and it is not dependent on what I do or say at all. But how do you get that revelation of the nature of God's love if you don't screw up? Now, I'm not saying it was necessary for Adam and Eve to screw up. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, what if we see it more as Adam and Eve screwing up, and we look more at God's, nevertheless, this is a great teachable moment to actually reveal what? Their sin? Because you are stinking sinners. You understand that. You're enemies of God. The list goes on and on. Paul was pretty graphic. But at the same time, Paul was very, very good at saying, while we were yet sinners. So in other words, God's operating from a nevertheless. Sin becomes a teachable moment for God to reveal His glory, how great He is. This is just going to add even more to the pot. Because, what happens at the end of eternity if there is no fall, and you got an enemy, this naughty little angel, saying, well, yeah, of course, you loved them because they were good. You loved them because of this. You loved them because what if they would have screwed up? Then what would you? So I would have loved them anyway. And I would have taken care of the screw up. I'm not saying God manufactured this. In fact, some people do believe it. I don't believe it at all. I just believe that God knows He knows Himself. He knows us. He created us. He knows the deal. He sees it before it happens. And like a good parent knows what He's going to do before He does it. Have we reduced the Incarnation, His glory, His love, His grace and truth to a doctrine and a religion, I might add, that feeds the agenda of the enemy, so we don't really enjoy our relationship, which is where this thing was going, our relationship with Him and each other. Only fear and shame. Like I said before, we tend to see salvation from our end, while God is looking at salvation from a different end, and Incarnation is bigger than that. Now, I do want to say this. The relationship of Incarnation and salvation, only God can save us, clearly. And that's a non-negotiable. Only God can redeem us, deliver us, free us. Sin was a teachable moment. Romans 5, verse 8, and then verse 10. You can read them back to back.
But God demonstrates His own love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of His Son, much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by His life.
Uh-oh. How many of us, when we preach the message of salvation, go right to the cross? Christ died for us. We do, don't we? Mm-hmm. Maybe you don't. Maybe it's, I don't know. I shouldn't put it that. Some of you might actually refer to what Paul just said. What are we saved by?
Grace.
No, what did you just read? The end of that verse, the end of the 10th verse.
We shall be saved by His life.
Wow.
That can't be right. Somebody screwed up something. That can't be right. See, Paul puts it in the perfect context. We're reconciled by His death, but we're saved by His life. I'm not saying that we shouldn't emphasize the death of our Lord on that cross. I can't say that enough. I just wish we'd get over it and get on to the true message of the Word and the presentation of the glory of God that has been presented for a long time, that Jesus prayed about in the end, that Paul, John, they all presented, that we've just kind of gone by. It's almost like it's right in our face, but there's still a dimension of our blindness, our spiritual blindness, that's not seeing it, because we're told what to focus on. Don't look at that. Don't look at any of that. Keep your eyes on this. That's all I'm suggesting, that maybe with the Incarnation, we've gotten so salvation top heavy, not that it's not a part of it, but from God's perspective, my goodness, an awful lot more was going on in the Incarnation. He chose to reach every point of humanity, every point of human need. How? By sharing in our humanity. That's more than saving us, by the way. I would venture to say that if any of those people, somebody who received their sight, that they would say the pinnacle moment was when he gave me my eyesight back. I think they would have looked at it a little bit differently. And that's one of the things the Incarnation was about, was to share our lives, to touch people nobody else was touching, to bring a true revelation of the glory of God to those who couldn't possibly begin to cope with it. How do you get by leprosy and blindness and deafness and shame and demonic possession, and list goes on and on. He shared in humanity so we could share in his divinity as a son. He became what we are to make us what he is. Again, this is just a thought. I'm not presenting doctrine. I'm just saying to you, this is what I think. And this is really important for all of us to get a hold of. By the time I'm done here, you say, well, I think I know what Steve thinks now. And I think some of these passages that I might have read one way, maybe I should be praying about and considering other ways of looking at these passages and things that they were actually saying, and come at it from God's perspective instead of ours. Instead of turning something into what we want it to say, because that's what our leaders have told us over the years, this is the way you look at this, that maybe we should be saying, God, what are you actually saying? And flush your brain of all the other things that we've made it. Incarnation is not just for salvation, it's much more. It's not just a return to the past, which a lot of people would say, being restored as if we never would have sinned, but the fulfillment of love, a future. It's not about the past, it's about the future. The Incarnation was a presentation of the future. What is before you, not what was behind you. Romans 8, verses 16, 17, 18, and then 29 and 30.
The Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And if children, then heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. If so be that we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together.
Being glorified together. There's a destination there. Verses 29 and 30.
For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate, to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom he did predestine, them he also called, and who he called, them he justified, and who he justified, then he also glorified.
The destination is always glorification. Always. We beheld the glory in order to be glorified.